My first experiment in communications was when I was 10 years old. It involved a string going across the street with two poles and two tin cans. John, the kid that lives across the street, and I communicated every night with the cans and the strings. We thought it was very critical, very important. Well, eventually, I went over to a friend's house. His name was Dean Jones. Don't know whatever happened to Dean. But talking to Dean, we were contemplating model trains, another hobby of mine, and which size, N gauge, X gauge, Y gauge, I can't even remember. We were talking about trains. And from a door that was half opened off their living room, I heard a man calling CQ, CQ, CQ. CQ 6 meters. I said, what's he doing? He's talking to himself. Dean said, no, that's my brother. He's a ham radio operator. I said, ham radio operator? What? So I'm immediately abandoning my friend Dean. I rush into the room, and there's a chair right next to the chair with the microphone. So I sat down. I don't even know this guy. And I hear a voice come back over the radio. I was agog. I realized that that big thing that was on top of their house was an antenna, no string, and he was communicating by radio. My God, I thought, I must do this. It took me a couple years, but I did get a ham license. And my original call was WV6, FCY. And my parents, they treated me well. Because if I saw the radio and I wanted it, my mom and dad would struggle to somehow make sure I got it. So I started from the very basic radio system and came up to a better radio system. And at the age of 14 or so, I had met a group of guys in what was called Star Pit, Society of Teenage Amateur Radio Operators and Philosophers or something, or traffickers. I can't remember what it meant. But we were all about the same age. And we talked every single night. We even had a preamble for that. It was such a net. We were radical kids, and we battled with the American Legion, which were always talking politics. We talked about comic books. We talked about, well, I could just name all the subjects that we talked about. But that stuck with me at 14. Believe it or not, on this very day that I'm talking to you, I, this morning on the radio, talked with a friend of mine that goes way back to those years. Still connected together through this miracle of ham radio. I know that I'm starting over on YouTube, and the thousands of subscribers that I once had are now 25. So I know there's probably not of value here with this message today. But as I do these videos, I think this stuff will always be here. So it may not reach people today, but maybe tomorrow. Young people that think because they have a cell phone, they've mastered this thing of communication. Who in heaven's name would need a ham radio, right? Well, I've given that thought. Ham radio is invaluable in my life of operating. I remember an earthquake in Alaska, and I was up almost 2 days straight relaying messages from Alaska to all over the United States. There were no cell phones. And of course, in a disaster like that today, there may not be any cell phones that operate. And the telephone poles with their wires like my early tin cans and string, the string's going to be broke. Ham radio is very important today. So why should you get involved in it? Well, let me tell you. The reason is very simple. It will give you an anchor through life. I know that I would say 90% of my jobs have come through ham radio. You see, there's a camaraderie between ham operators. It's not the same today as when I was young. When I was young, the camaraderie was based on things like the knowing of Morse code. Knowing that those little firecracker things inside of a radio cabinet were resistors. And what they did, you learned all this stuff when you passed the test. And that did give us a camaraderie, sort of like when two doctors meet. However, today, all of that is here, so much more. You can still make contacts. I ended up moving from Lancaster, California, up to McMinnville, Oregon, because of a man that I talked to. His name was Ray, and we talked every night. And he owned a radio station. Well, obviously he had an opening, so he offered me a job. And I went up to McMinnville, Oregon, with my trusting and loyal dog. I live with dogs still. That's almost as powerful as ham radio to me. Maybe not quite. So anyway, that brought me into the Northwest, which led me to Eugene, Oregon, Coos Bay, Oregon. I've often said if there's a radio tower, I've probably been fired from there at one point, strictly on the West Coast. But I made contacts with other people that owned radio stations. So from Eugene, we went to Portland, and from Portland up to Seattle, and I'm in Seattle, and I have a chance in San Francisco, so I go down there. If I would have stayed down there, I probably would not be doing this video from my remote compound in the Pacific Northwest. Unfortunately, trying to do a talk show in Seattle and flying down to San Francisco for the weekends and then flying back pretty well took up the money that I was making in Frisco, so I decided I can't do this. I also don't like flying, except I have a light. That's all right, let's not go there. I just don't trust those things. I don't know how they stay up. They watch on the news. They're always crashed. Dead bodies everywhere. Very traumatic on an old man. Well, putting all that aside, it's a great fraternity. It's an awesome, awesome hobby. And it provides you a network of people that can lead to jobs. And more important, friendships that will last a lifetime. Forget about the little firecrackers in the radio. It's good to know what they are, though. I think if you could understand what it is when you're in your 70s, even though, as Johnny Cash said in that song, they all go away in the end, I never ever thought I would live with a dog. It affects me, and people give me dirty looks. Yet, it's that ham radio that's the one anchor that is in my life today. And it led to so many other things. And it can do it for you, too. Licenses are a lot simpler today to get than they were back when I was doing it with Lewis and Clark. We won't go there, or Meriwether Lewis. Well, there's a story there, but I'm not going to waste time. They were before amateur radio. Let me sum it up. The first thing sent across the ether were the words, "What hath God wrought?" How profound. We could spend a week sitting in a room trying to figure out, what do we say first? Hi, world. But they came up with, "What hath God wrought?" It's a question. I'm sure they had no idea that this would lead to the internet, the super information highway. I bet they had no idea whatsoever that you could sit in your room and talk to the world. But it's not the same. The reality is, ham radio will be here for emergencies. It'll be here to help you get a job. And it'll be here to get you a lot of friends. I was going to try to do this video in 3 minutes. Somehow I failed. Nonetheless, I hope you will consider it. I'll be glad to answer questions if you want to put them in the comments. What hath God wrought? How profound is that? If you will excuse me, 73.